Welcome back to Bucks latest. And before we get into everything, a massive shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. Once again, a huge shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. As always, I'm your host, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. We're still on that road to 2,000 subs. So if that's a journey you feel compelled to join, please consider doing so. And also turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future Milwaukee Bucks updates. So, first thing that we're going to get into is actually something that I completely forgot to mention just in the grand scheme of things when it came to the Timberwolves 33-point win against the Bucks, with no Anthony Edwards, with no Rudy Gobert. And that was that at halftime when the Bucks were going into the locker room down by 31 at the half and allowing the Timberwolves to score, was it 74 points or 75 points in that first half? The Bucks fans at Pfizer Forum were booing the Milwaukee Bucks, and I don't think that it wasn't deserved, and I wouldn't expect the home fans of a team like this to react any other way, honestly. And I know that, Milwaukee Bucks fans or Milwaukee fans in general just don't have that same kind of thing where it's, oh, those Bucks fans are going to be on you guys if you lose, like how maybe the Knicks fans would be, or it's like a Philadelphia Eagles, someone like that, where the fan base, the culture there, it's very, if you don't perform, the fans are going to be on you. And that's what we saw with the Milwaukee Bucks fans in Pfizer Forum that night, just overwhelmed with disappointment coming into a game again with no Anthony Edwards and no four-time defensive player of the year center Rudy Gobert. You just wonder where the Bucks energy went for that game. And I really don't think it was that big of a deal that after the halftime break, I think Giannis got an and one pretty early into the third quarter. Maybe it was the first play of the third quarter, and he decided to boo back the Bucks fans and throw up the big thumbs down and yell boo back at everybody. And I don't think that it's the biggest deal. And Giannis said in the post game, anytime that I get booed, I'm gonna boo back, and I guess that's regardless of where he is or who's doing the booing. Um, so I just I don't know. People are going to obviously try and turn this into a bigger thing where it's, oh my gosh, yeah, of course he's out of here now. Now he's turning against the fans. What's happening with Giannis? But I really don't think it was that. I think because, the players are obviously frustrated themselves. It's not like they don't realize what's going on, and that the fans are the only ones that are, trying to hold them accountable. They're trying to hold themselves accountable, surely. But Giannis kind of turning back and going at the fans. I don't love it or hate it necessarily. I just think that's just Giannis. Like when he does something like that, oh, that's just Giannis. That's kind of the first thought that comes to my mind. Also, something that I noticed that was pretty interesting about this game or after this game, Giannis was also asked in the post game about if his leadership kind of had any impact on how the Bucks were playing, or if he needed to do more as a leader, maybe. And what Giannis basically said in response was that maybe my words just are hollow at this point. Maybe things that I'm saying just aren't really connecting with this group. But as a leader, these are the things that I'm going to have to continue to do. I'm going to have to continue to try and talk some sense into these guys and lead by example. Something though that I didn't really love that he said was that at some point in the response, he said that it essentially feels like being a dad on this team. That at least when it comes to being a leader for especially the younger guys, that it can feel like he can feel like a dad. And I don't really love that. I don't like when in any capacity when athletes on a certain team, regardless of their age, regardless of their seniority within the team, within the league, when they talk about themselves as a father figure, or when anybody brings them up as a father figure to anybody else on the team. It kind of reminds me of in 2015 or 2016 when it was Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, and someone asked LeBron, or no, someone asked Kyrie if LeBron was like a father figure to him. And again, this was back when, LeBron was maybe, how old would he have been? Maybe 30, maybe like 32, and Kyrie was still a young guy, about 23. But just asking a guy like Kyrie Irving, what's the kind of like fatherly impact that that LeBron has had on you? I feel like those kinds of things are a little disrespectful. And in this scenario, it is different because Giannis is the one saying it to the rest of this Bucks group that, sometimes I feel like a dad, but I feel like it's just a little bit, it just borders on disrespectful kind of in really any capacity, because you're all playing on the same team in the National Basketball Association, and these other guys now on the team. I wonder if guys like maybe Ryan Rollins or Kevin Porter Jr. or any of the kind of younger guys are thinking to themselves, what is Giannis saying? He's not my dad. He's not my father. He's not a father figure. We're both like, I'm a grown man. At least that's what I would be thinking if I was Ryan Rollins or Kevin Porter Jr. That I'm a grown man. I don't need anybody else on this team, even if it's Giannis, one of the greatest players to ever step foot on the court, to be a father figure. That's not really what I'm looking for in this experience. I'm trying to play my brand of basketball, and we're not figuring it out right now, but hopefully we will soon. So I just didn't really like that assertion from Giannis that sometimes I feel like a dad. Maybe that's kind of blowing it out of proportion a little bit, but I've always got this feeling when in sports, when guys say, other than when we've, in the rare occasions that we've seen a father son duo, that it's kind of just a little bit disrespectful to be like, yeah, I guess I'm a father figure to these guys. I don't know, but that's just me. Anyways, moving forward, I think we have hit a point where obviously you can't allow, teams like the Charlotte Hornets or the Washington Wizards or the Minnesota Timberwolves without Anthony Edwards and without Rudy Gobert to score between 125 to 140 points in a given game on any given night in any given matchup where, let's say, maybe there's a game where, Con Knipple for the Hornets is out, but the Hornets still put up 123 points or something crazy like that. Like, those are the kinds of examples of, just this inept defense that we've been seeing over the past couple of days and couple of weeks. And obviously it's the obvious statement to say, something has to change, but what will it be, on what level? Will it be through a trade? Will it be through something else, just the Bucks finding some sort of, hidden gem within the rotation? And I feel like the latter of those options is the more likely, because as I've said before in previous episodes, the Bucks defensive personnel is not this bad. I truly believe that. Kind of like how Cade Cunningham last year said about the Pistons, we're not great, but we're not, 2 and 24 bad. That's how I feel about this Bucks defense, that they still have so much to give. And I think that maybe if we kind of change the focus a little bit of these lineups to more of lineups where it's, let's say, defensive oriented with Ryan Rollins, KPJ, guys like Gary Harris, and then Giannis and Miles Turner, I don't think that would necessarily be too bad of an option. And of course, I kind of just named the starting lineup and threw Gary Harris in there, but I've loved what I've seen from him defensively so far this year. And over the past couple of games, he's proven to be a very consistent catch and shoot guy in the corners. So maybe it's more likely that the Bucks just give Gary Harris more of a chance, more of an opportunity to shine in a defensive role, and catching and shooting in the corners for three. But just incorporating guys that are more willing on defense to, just to give some kind of spark and to throw different looks at teams. I feel like that is something that needs to happen. So that's kind of my thing about the defense, where I don't really know from an X's and O's standpoint what the Bucks could be doing, because of course their rotations on defense, if they're caught in a mismatch and they're forced to double and then they're sent scrambling, things haven't turned out well for them. So I don't really know how to counteract that, but just adding more of a defensive minded approach to the lineups in general, I feel like, and like wholesale, like just putting in guys that are on the court for defense entirely, along with Giannis, or along with Giannis and Miles Turner, and see how that goes. I feel like maybe that could be something, just maybe. Fast breaks, buzzer beaters, and block parties are back, and Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action. Playing on Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like points, rebounds, steals, and more. Get your picks right, and you could win up to 5,000 times your cash. This week on Underdog, I'm looking at Bucks Spurs, and I'm going to be selecting Bobby Portis for higher than 18.5 points, rebounds, and assists, and De'Aaron Fox for lower than 28.5 points, rebounds, and assists. Download the app today and use promo code BasketballFan to score $75 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. Once again, that is promo code BasketballFan. Underdog, make picks, win money. All right, so over the next few games, we're going to be seeing at least what I think a stat boom from some guys in this Bucks rotation. Of course, Giannis Antetokounmpo has been going nuts ever since returning from that injury, and he's only continued to produce. But I think I'm going to go in a bit of a direction with a guy that I'll be watching over the next little while, and that is Bobby Portis. I feel like the projections on him, regardless of whether you see it being like I said before, it was 18.5 points, rebounds, and assists for this next game coming up against the Spurs. I would smash the higher on Bobby Portis for any game coming up where his points are set at a point where, he needs higher than 14 points. Because over the past 10 games or so, that's the kind of mark that he's been hitting, averaging around 14 points. And he's been just insane from the field and 3 point range. He's absolutely blistering right now, about 49% from both the field and the 3 point line on around 5.5 attempts from three. So, what I'm thinking for Bobby Portis is that over the next couple of weeks or so, especially, not even just for this upcoming game against the San Antonio Spurs. But Bobby Portis is going to stay on this hot streak. He's going to stay on a roll because someone in this Bucks rotation needs to give them a little bit more of, I don't know if a sense of urgency is the right word or terminology, but kind of a push. And you know that Bobby Portis has always been the guy on the Bucks that is really most reliable for that outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo. Maybe you could have thrown Chris Middleton in that conversation back in his prime, in his heyday, but Bobby Portis coming off that bench, he is the main catalyst, obviously, for the Bucks bench scoring, and he's been one of the best bench scorers and best bench players in the entire NBA for the past, couple of years, and really ever since he got to Milwaukee. But especially over this next stretch, and specifically for this next game, I feel like he's going to go on an offensive tear because the big man core for the San Antonio Spurs is obviously going to be a tough one for, let's say, Giannis and Miles Turner to actually put points on the board against and grab rebounds against. But, also when you look at the guards for the Spurs rotation, um, asking Ryan Rollins and KPJ to score consistently and efficiently against the likes of Stephon Castle and De'Aaron Fox and Dylan Harper, who has proven to be a pretty solid defender as well. I feel like the most likely guy, or at least the most likely position for this Bucks team to see a pretty big uptick in points is, on the wings. Of course, there's still super solid defenders on the wings for the Spurs, like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson and Harrison Barnes when he's healthy, and all these guys. But I think Bobby Portis has the best chance of really getting mismatches against these kinds of guys, whether it's in the mid post or just pulling up for threes in transition like he's known to do, and taking advantage of them. I feel like Bobby Portis is going to be the most consistent guy from a scoring, whether it's on high or low volume, that Bobby Portis is going to be the most consistent scoring option, arguably, for this Bucks team outside of Giannis in this coming game and over the next couple of days. So I think my pick for a guy whose stats I would watch and whose projections I would watch for points and potentially taking the higher on those points. It's Bobby Portis. So I think he's going to have a massive impact for this Bucks bench rotation. Of course, he has for the last 10 games, and even for the next 5-10 games. I think he's going to just keep this hot streak going, at least from an efficiency perspective. All right, so moving forward, the January 15th trade restriction has finally been lifted for Golden State Warriors forward Jonathan Kuminga. Of course, he re-signed with the team as a free agent this past offseason, and he's been in trade talks, obviously before that, because a sign and trade was on the table. And then ever since then, from this summer to this point, and all the way up until February 5th, you would imagine, if a deal isn't already done, that he is going to be in conversations to be traded, or he will be traded very, very soon. And I've been thinking more and more often, with the amount of disappointing losses that have been picked up by this Bucks team, for how bleak this future, well, this present and the future looks, maybe the best option is to just try and pry Jonathan Kuminga from the Warriors for some package of maybe Kuz. It would stink to throw Bobby in there, but Kuz and Bobby, just for the good of the, the near and, potentially far future, to just get a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, and especially for this Bucks team who now and in the future will need more productivity and kind of explosiveness and versatility from their wings. Jonathan Kuminga, for better or for worse, has all the potential in the world to be one of the best, or like, the most high level 3 and D wings, maybe not 3 and D, but incredible, impactful two-way wings that's just uber athletic and can get up and down the floor in a flash, with a 48-inch vertical. Like, Jonathan Kuminga is that guy that has legitimate all-star upside, though he hasn't really proved it as much in his, 10 or 18 games for the Warriors this season, averaging maybe 12 points a game. He just hasn't really gotten a consistent chance to do so. He hasn't been a focal point at all in Steve Kerr's rotation when he's involved. Otherwise, he's just getting coaches' decisions or, DNP coaches' decisions every single game. They just refuse to play him. So I'm wondering if that is just the idea that this Bucks front office is going to have now, and as that trade deadline comes up, that Jonathan Kuminga is going to be a guy to get. Of course, there's other teams, maybe like the Sacramento Kings, who have been rumored as really the only team that's actually interested in trading for him now. But I think it wouldn't necessarily be a stupid idea for the Bucks to, call up again on his value, maybe try and get a deal done for, I guess it would be the typical Kuzma, Bobby Portis, and 2031 first round pick deal that gets this kind of thing across the finish line. But just for the far future of this team, you need something to look forward to. You need someone to put some kind of, stock into and put hope into. And I feel like Jonathan Kuminga could be that guy for this Bucks team that hasn't really had like a high level wing of his caliber, I guess, or his archetype, I should say, in a little bit. So maybe that's just a thing that the Bucks should do is trade for Jonathan Kuminga. And on that subject, will the Milwaukee Bucks turn things around before this deadline? Of course, there's still some pretty interesting matchups that these Bucks have to face along the way prior to February 5th, and that will be the Spurs, and then a matchup again with the Oklahoma City Thunder, another rematch against the Denver Nuggets, and now Nikola Jokic is back resuming on-court activities and on-court workouts, so he'll probably be back by the time that January 23rd matchup is set to happen against the Nuggets. Again, the Dallas Mavericks with Cooper Flag, even though he just got injured, so maybe he won't be available. The 76ers with Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, Joel Embiid back playing like an all-star again. An underrated Wizards group now with, I don't know if Trae Young, he probably won't be playing by that time, but still they have gunners on that team that can upset the Bucks any night. A Celtics team on February 1st that has been playing like one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, and Jaylen Brown is looking to be a legitimate MVP candidate. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for the Bucks to either, you know, satisfy this franchise or satisfy these fans of this franchise and pull off wins that maybe wouldn't have been looked at as possible beforehand, or there's also the chance for them to suffer some pretty incredible upsets. I feel like with this team things can just go either way, like it could just flip-flop on any given night. But those games against the Thunder and the Nuggets, I hate to say, but you would, in the grand scheme of things, you would chalk those up maybe as losses to begin with. But they'll have legitimate shots against the 76ers, the Wizards, the Celtics, the Chicago Bulls, the Atlanta Hawks. There's definitely so many opportunities for this team to make a comeback, but it'll just take a lot of mental fortitude, especially against these teams that are contenders right now, for them to really get things going. But as always, I do have faith. And with that being said, that'll be it for me on today's episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. Once again, thank you very much for watching. And if you've gotten to this point, thank you so much. And we're still on that road again to 2,000 subscribers. So if you want to be one of those few, you might as well press that subscribe button down below and turn on those post notifications. Leave a like, leave a comment down below. And once again, a absolutely massive shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring the video. And I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.